Welcome back to the Loonie Hour, episode 6. We're back with the man on the right there, Rich Diaz with Acorn Macro Consulting. Some of the finest research and best charts you'll find on the internet. And of course, we've got our favorite boomer, as always, in his Patagucci, Keith Dicker of IceCap Asset Management. Professionally managing money for 30 years. How you doing, Keith?
Doing great today. How's everyone? Rich?
I'm good. It's good. It's raining and it's miserable outside, but it's nice inside, and I'm happy to talk with you guys. So here we go.
Yes. Speaking of rain, we'll get into that because we had a nice washout here in BC, which again, being Canadian and obviously myself living in BC, we'll focus on some of the economic ramifications of what's happening here in BC, of what's shutting down some of the Vancouver port. Obviously, we've got food inflation on the top of everyone's mind, and that seems like that's going to get worse. Basically, I think first and foremost, I want to touch on not to beat a dead horse here, but Canada's CPI inflation. Coming in, correct me if I'm wrong here, Rich, I think it was 4.6%.
4.7.
4.7. So kind of right along expectations. And that was, in your opinion, Rich, you were like, well, that might be a good argument for the transitory camp. Explain your rationale there.
I just thought it was actually I've hated the transitory camp for a long time. It doesn't really mean anything to anyone. However, this print, which came in 4.7, the expectations were 4.7 or 4.65, I should say. I think was actually sort of lends a lot of if you look at the data closely, and I'll go over it in a second. It was sort of a lot of good news in the sense that you had services component, which was actually started to slow. You had a bunch of key components like shelter and transportation, which were at 30-year highs, have come off those numbers. One of the things that I always look at is the BOC 3 preferred measures of core inflation. It's this very fancy thing that eliminates transitory and sector-specific fluctuations in inflation. That's a big mouthful. The point is it's meant to avoid any garbage from supply chain stuff, et cetera. And that's slowed. So
what is that at right now?
So I can tell you exactly what that's at. It is at, it's like 2.9 and 3.9, 3.3. But for me, I'm looking at the pace and the rate of change. And when you look at the chart, you say, you know what, actually, maybe. However, you look at things like PPI, excluding energy, and it tells you there's ways to go. So I think we're in this weird position where we're trying to figure out who's right and who's wrong.
I was going to say, if you start to suggest that inflation might be transitory, you're going to get dogpiled on here online.
No, I might be the last one. But listen, I just follow the data. I'm always happy to change my mind if proven so. But for now, I still think that word is very, very bullshit.
Keith, do you have any preliminary thoughts?
Yeah. See, I think we're all amateur economists, at some level. And one of my favorite
armchair economists,
amateurs, all the same stuff. But one really cool stat. So this is for the U.S. data overall. I think for the period from 1968 or 69 up to 2014, last time I saw it. The numbers aren't quite right, but you get the gist of it. I think there's been 12 recognized recessions in the U.S. during that time. The Professional Economic Forecasters Association, or something like that, whatever the acronym is. So out of these 12 recessions, these lads predicted exactly 0. Not one of them. And the other thing that's really great about this data set, not only do this group of economists collectively not predict any of the recessions or forecast recession, they've never collectively forecast a negative or a decline in economic growth during the same period. So my point is, Some economic data points, you just got to take them for what they are. And like, so for the average person on the street, they don't care. They see prices going up. And, I think we said last week, my view of the whole inflation thing, at some point pretty soon, it's sort of going to start eating ourselves, and that will solve the problem a different way. But with economic data, and for Canadian data specifically, and Rich would know this, the GDP data is pretty good. Inflation data, they're a lot better with. Whenever you start looking at employment numbers that come out, it is the biggest variability or fluctuation from the actual number to the consensus estimate from 1 month to another in Canada. It's the worst I've ever seen. And actually, I remember a few months back, actually a couple of years probably, 1 month, the revision for the employment number was the exact number needed to offset the miss they had from 3 months before that. So again, my point is, we're sort of rambling on. Statistics Canada, or data coming out in Canada for the economy, sometimes it can be pretty third world. It can be pretty funny.
You're here.
Trust what you see. So trust what you see yourself. That's what I'm telling people. If numbers are going up.
When we talked about this, was that great quote? We talked about this before the show, but there's about how we're doing our best efforts here, but a lot of the data in Canada is pretty suspect. I mean, we'll throw up this chart here of from Rich from the Canadian food inflation, right? I mean, I think the government, Rich, what was it? It was 3.6%.
It's in the threes. It's you know what? It's less than 4. I think that's the more meaningful way to put it.
3.8% is what they've got for food inflation, and they even got Rich, you did a good job here. You broke it down, like table service restaurants. I don't know if anyone else has gone out for food at a restaurant. I have, and I can tell you, food at restaurants is up a hell of a lot more than 3.6%. I mean,
year on year.
I'm not a fancy guy, man, but dinner for two is now in Vancouver is like $100 plus, easy.
Okay, in Halifax it's 80, easy, and that's with one drink. And something's happened. There's been a shift in prices materially higher than any of the statistics.
What's that famous quote? It's from Jeff Bezos. I think he says it's if the data doesn't quite match up with the what is it? What's that? So you know what I'm talking about.
I actually have no idea what you're talking about.
He's like when the anecdotes overwhelm the data, it's usually the anecdotes that are right. When something doesn't pass the smell test, you're like,
I don't know. As a data guy, I really don't like that. But in this case, it's the exception that proves the rule. I think everybody listening, I think the three of us talking, my mother, my sister, everybody knows that prices of food, all food, not fancy food, all food has gone up far more than 3, 4, 5, 10% even. And I think that there's a real dislocation with the data. And I think it's real. I really hope that when Tiff Macklin sits on the CBC couch or the whatever and talks to the reporters, that he knows in his mind that all those numbers are bogus.
Keith loves it.
Why am I wrong?
No, I can only comment largely from a housing perspective, because that's I'm in the trenches. I'm in deep in that space, and it's I look at a lot of the government data that comes out on housing, and I'm like, ooh, man, that is not reflective of what I see day to day, the rental market or vacancy rates and all that stuff.
So give us an insight into that. Is it too high, too low? Where is the major discrepancy? Keith outlined that employment's a big discrepancy. I'm saying that inflation's a big discrepancy, but GDP is pretty good.
I think that, for example, the worst data in the housing market is the rental data. It's consistently underreported. So they'll say, oh, well, rents are up, in Vancouver, 4% or something. And it's well, it's 10 plus, or it has been in the past, for example. And the problem with that is, I think we touched on this before, but basically what they do is Stats Canada, I believe, interviews, or CMHC actually collects the data, and they interview property managers who manage professionally run multifamily apartment buildings. But the fact is you're not capturing the rent turnovers. yeah, you've got people in there. You're surveying people that have been in their rental thing for 20 years and haven't had a rent increase in 10. And you're not also factoring in so much of the rental market in Canada is through private landlords. It's through mom and pops that have 1 or 2 condos. You're not surveying those people. And that's more reflective because those people tend to have higher turnovers.
So it's the churn. They're missing the churn.
They're missing the churn, right? So, I mean, that's probably the biggest thing I can say.
Let's just go back though for a second, because we have all this anecdotal, data points that I know that doesn't make sense, but we have the anecdotal stories. But just to come back though, from a central bank perspective, the central banks, they do use core inflation. That's what they're looking at. They know the prices are going up, everything, but they're not going to very quickly start ramping up overnight rates because everyone on the street can see this. There's a lot of other considerations that are using. So it's fun for all of us to talk about it and, commiserate about it and things like that. But central bank, they're living in a 4% inflation world right now, and they think they can control it and bring it back down to 2, and they're never going to, react rashly like what's happening in Turkey today, which I do want to talk about, by the way, as we get going.
Yeah, we'll get into that
with the call today. But again, it's very important. Again, it's just from me as being an investment manager. Our success has always come from understanding how central banks are going to react to something. How will governments react to something? How will the corporate sector react and stuff like that? And it's very different from what the lad on the street is how they were going to react.
I think Keith, that's actually like a brilliant point, because I've tried to make that point as well before, respond to people here on Twitter and stuff. It's like everybody thinks that it's like, well, central banks, they should do this. Like, for example, you should normalize interest rates because like housing prices are going through the roof. But it's like, that's not how central banks think. Like, you might think that's how they should react, or this is the rational thing to do, right? But like, as you just mentioned, it's not about how you think they should be. It's how do they actually act and behave? Mm-hmm. And, I think obviously from an investment manager's perspective, and even from Rich's perspective, you have to keep your emotions out of it.
Well, that's such a fantastic point, actually. I could not have put it better myself. I would just add that in my job, and I would argue, and I'm going to speak for Keith for a second, so please forgive me, but it's not about what they should do, it's about what are they going to do, right? And you're 100% right. I think it's so important. All I do is think about not what they should do or what I would do, is what I think is going to happen. I think understanding those mistakes or when they get it right, I think is so important. And I think a lot of people on Twitter and YouTube and everybody else spends a lot of time talking about what they should do. The truth is they're not in that chair, so it doesn't freaking matter. I don't know. I think
the one thing that I always, the one thing I always found interesting, just on coming full circle, but on like, I don't know, I always found it interesting that we have like a national, for example, you have like a national inflation rate, right? So you're saying, okay, like that's going to come down, cores in the 3s, whatever. But it's always interesting, right? Because like, let's say that inflation rate comes back down to 2% and inflation's great. No need to hike interest rates now. I always found it interesting that you got a national inflation rate when you've got the major metros. So take, for example, the inflation rate in Vancouver and Toronto, for example, these major metros is probably running in the double digits, but like inflation in Dieppe, New Brunswick, where there's no economic growth, it's stagnant, could be 0.5%.
Steve, you cut out there, mate. Sorry. Right when you were saying that.
Yeah. I was just saying that basically I found it very interesting that at the end of the day, you have one inflation rate for the entire country, when inflation is much different in the large major metros than it is in suburbia, New Brunswick. But
I'm using that as an example. Why don't you share with us, what's been happening out in your neck of the woods with the flooding? Because I know we have a lot of listeners here from the West Coast, and they're familiar with it. But maybe a lot of people here on the East Coast and in Central Canada, they just don't understand what's happening and how it's affecting everyone.
Yeah. No, that's a good point. Yeah. So, I mean, for those that aren't familiar, obviously I'm here in BC, but it's been picking up on the news. But basically we had in the lower mainland here, in the province of BC, we basically had a month's worth of rainfall in one day. And obviously everybody knows in Vancouver, it rains a lot. So we had a month's worth. Basically what happened is it washed out major highways in BC. And essentially there's now no throughput. So you caught, like, there's entire cities or entire small towns in BC that are completely submerged underwater. People have been evacuated. And what's happening now, so again, tying everything all in together, is, for example, most of a huge portion, I should say, of Abbotsford, which is 45 minutes from the city of Vancouver. So most of Abbotsford is underwater right now. Basically, and Abbotsford, the BC government, of course, comes out. So Abbotsford is responsible for about 50% of, our food source in BC. So you're talking eggs, milk. It's all the farmlands in BC are predominantly underwater. And so, of course, the BC government comes out and creates more hysteria and says, nobody panic, which is the cue for panic, and says, don't go to the grocery stores and hoard food, be a good citizen. And of course, a couple hours later, there's all these viral videos that all the grocery stores in parts of BC are being ransacked. So, but basically, to come full circle here, is the Port of Vancouver has basically no access. So the rail cars, CP Rail, CN Rail, can't get and deliver their grains, and obviously half of our farmland is underwater. So we're probably going to have a food crisis here, which will certainly help the non-transitory camp.
So, I mean, I think what's good with what my point is that it's a perspective to think about with central bank policy. And obviously, this is a very difficult situation for everyone out there. And, my hearts are just with everyone who's going through that right now. But coming back as an investment manager, just say you're so rich, you're now the head of the Bank of Canada. You've got inflation shooting up now, or going to shoot up in the West Coast. How can you change monetary policy to bring that back down?
You can't
resign.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's one of the points that a lot of people are missing around the world right now with the inflation data. Like they're thinking that, central banks caused it by having low to negative rates and all that stuff. But you got to keep coming back to the supply chain constraints and shutdowns and so forth. Because if you think about it, I mean, with central banks, the Bank of Canada was at zero for 18 months, basically 2 years. And all of a sudden inflation's coming through. And again, I know these guys at the Bank of Canada, and they're saying, oh, we created inflation, but maybe we created a little bit too much. At the same time, the Europeans have had negative rates now for about 12 years, and they cannot create inflation. So again, it's really good for investors and individuals and families, everyone, to understand that you can have natural disasters that could take place, or supply chain disruption. That's what it's going to be, and it is going to impact prices of goods and things. So go back to your go back to your economics classes. Maybe your demand line and your supply curve. You put two of them together, or you shift one but not the other. That's what's happening here. So the demand side is roughly staying as is, and the supply side is switching.
Do you have any quick?
Can I just
go ahead.
Step in there? So I got to say something. So Keith, I agree with everything you said, but the problem, I think, so there's two things. One, we should be more forgiving of central bankers. I probably am at the head of the line of people who should be more forgiving of central bankers, given the constraints and given the fact that it's a political job. You're not a technocrat, you're a politician. But that being said, they did not have to buy 87% of all of the debt that was issued in the last 24 months. So, and to ignore what is obviously a housing bonanza is also, these people are smart. They see what's going on, and changing interest rates may or may not change supply issues, but it sure as hell exacerbated what was already a bête noire of the Canadian economy. And so that's where I That's why I don't agree, I guess.
It's like that famous Jim Grant quote. Jim Grant always bashes the Fed, and they say, Jim, if you were head of the Fed, what would you do? And he says, I'd resign immediately. I just can't think of a worse job. And I bash these guys all the time, but it's like, yeah, they are. It's a terrible job, and it's a thankless job. But
so let's next then. I want to talk about Turkey, and
do it.
Yeah,
American Thanksgiving.
You love Turkey. You love Turkey.
It's American Thanksgiving this week.
Yeah, as God is my witness, I thought they had wings. So, or no, I thought they could fly. I think that's what Les Nessman said. But because I'm in U.S. markets most of the time with the way my day works. American Thanksgiving, I take it off every year. So actually, as a good Canadian, I take a double holiday on that day, which is good. But back to Turkey, the country, what's happening. And again, this is very important for Canadians to know. So leading into today and last month and stuff, there's been so much complacency in the world with, across commodity prices, equities, currencies, you name it. Like no one sees risk happening coming from anywhere. Turkey has been a slow motion train wreck with the currency. It's been declining slowly, and then how do you get in trouble? Very quickly. That's where they are today. So right now, overnight, they're a central bank, so they have inflation running crazy over in Turkey. They have to import all of their energy. They have a net flow out or outflow of U.S. dollars. The economy not doing very well. So they're a central bank. What they did, they cut interest rates today. So they shocked everyone. And, there's a lot of political factors tied into that. But so, they believe raising rates will create inflation, or Erdogan does anyway, the president of Turkey. So, and he keeps, hiring and firing central bankers till they do what they want. Well, this morning he got what they wanted. They cut rates, I think it was 100 basis points. And so the lira is now once again, like it's in free fall, here today and yesterday. So the question is, why is that important? Because there's been so much complacency around the investment world over the last 18 months, everyone's made money. I mean, it's pretty hard not to make money these days with all financial markets. Everyone is now starting to look for an excuse or reason to take money off the table and to sell. So all of a sudden, over the last couple of weeks, currency markets are moving that way. So the South African rand, it's coming down hard. Peso came off hard. Even CAD had a bit of an off day a couple of days ago, same with the Rial and things like that. But the events in Turkey are important. So the Central Bank of Turkey, their foreign exchange reserves, which is mostly US dollars, it's basically in a negative position right now. And people say, well, what the heck does that mean? It means that instead of having US dollars in their reserve account, the Central Bank of Turkey are actually taking it from the commercial banks and then using those dollars to buy Turkish lira on the open market to try to stabilize the currency. That would be the same as if the Bank of Canada knocked on RBC's door and said, hey, we are taking all of your US dollars on deposit and we'll give them back to you when we're ready. So that's what's happening in Turkey right now. Within Turkey, people who have US dollars on deposit, they don't realize their money has gone missing. They still see it on their bank statement when they go online banking. They still think it's there and everything. But the point is that it's spiraling pretty quickly. And a lot of the Spanish banks have exposure to Turkish debt at the sovereign level. They also have equity ownership in some of the Turkish banks. Remember, banks are always levered, depending on which way you're looking at it, 10 to 20 times. That's the way they are. So just the smallest loss in Turkey will creep over into Spain, which then seeps up into France, down to Italy, hits the German banks, over to the UK banks, and so forth. And this is the kind of event that we're looking at here now, where we can see how all of a sudden global growth, it really comes slowing down dramatically at the exact same time when these prices are high for everyone. So again, this is an event that people need to, when they're listening to this now, start researching Turkey, because it can be the event where, Les Nessman will come out and say,
yeah,
it's God is my witness. I thought turkeys could fly.
Yeah. Well, is that Is that do you view these events as somewhat core? I've just noticed this week, coming kind of full circle with I know you love the ECB, right? Like ECB Lagarde, they're coming out and saying, pushing back on all these rate hikes, basically saying, now is not the time. I think we had the RBA, which is the Australian Central Bank, came out and poo-pooed that basically and told everyone to go take a hike. I mean, doesn't that all come back sort of to? I mean, they're probably not really looking at Turkey though, are they?
Are they looking at Turkey or am I?
Yeah, these central bankers. They're probably not really looking at it like.
I mean, they probably are. They probably aren't. They probably are looking on it. Sorry to interrupt you. I just want to say that they probably definitely, if they're smart central bankers, they have it on their radar for sure. I think what Keith is saying is that as investors, that's where you with the market being so complacent, you look for pinch points, the things that are going to like topple the deck of cards. I think that he's right when he talks about Turkey. And I think he's right about the buyer strike too. That's like something that we're talking internally is like, if inflation keeps going up and up and up and people like one of the things that, and maybe we'll share this chart this week, is inflation expectations. And for years and years and years, they were flat and now they've massively spiked for consumers, consumer inflation expectation. And that's a huge, huge thing. And I think it's whether it's Turkey, which we should be very, very mindful of. We're not sure if the central banks are or not, but we should it's weird that it's so complacent.
Another story, like again, people may not be aware of it or not, but Turkey is really one of the gateways for migrants to go from the Middle East into Europe, into the EU. So the golden ticket, if you're in, say, North Africa or the Middle East, you get into the EU, you go to Germany or Sweden, which is a great country to land in as a migrant. Turkey has closed the doors because the EU is paying them billions of dollars a year to keep the fence up, basically. They say, hey, you house these guys and we'll pay you. What's happening right now in Turkey, they now want more money. Have migrants are up against the fence now in Poland. I don't know if anyone's watching that.
Belarus and Poland.
Yeah, absolutely.
Can you explain that a little bit further?
So what's happening? Things are so bad in the Middle East and North Africa. Again, like food inflation, for example. We talked about the Arab Spring from a few years ago. The same kind of situation is happening in that everybody wants a better life. That's all they want. And if life is not very good where you are, you move. So as Canadians, we have total freedom. We can move to Vancouver, Calgary, Ontario, wherever you want to go. We're able to do that. It's very difficult to move into the EU because people want to go there because the EU governments, they give out so many benefits for everyone. And it costs money.
It's not just that. Come on. It's a great place to live. It's safe. There's no violence. Yes, the benefits are huge, but there's no bombs. Carry on.
Yeah, it's better than before. Yeah, it's better than than where some of these people are. So what's happening though, and again, we go back to Turkey. You remember there was an attempted coup on Erdogan a few years back. I think was orchestrated on his side personally to make it look like.
Me too. I think that too.
But the point is, he has a lot of support within Istanbul, but outside, not so much. There's always the possibility here. And again, to add to it, you have all the natural gas pipelines, from the Middle East are flowing up to Turkey into the EU. You have the possibility here that Turkey can go up or down in flames at the moment's notice, which all of a sudden then opens the floodgates for the next new migrant crisis into Europe at the exact same time when the economies start to roll over again. The ECB, they'll never raise rates, guys, no matter what they say or don't say.
I agree.
But again, these are just examples where events from outside of Canada can affect us globally. And so again, I've often said that the challenge to the Canadian housing market, for example, is not going to be a Canadian specific event. It's going to come from somewhere else. I've always said Europe. I always said Europe would be the key market for, but maybe it's an emerging market country. But these are the big hotspots that, everybody that I speak with my network these days, we're all watching this every day right now. And, capital that can move freely at a moment's notice, it does. Like it'll go like that. And then once capital starts moving, it snowballs and sort of, creates what it was trying to run away from.
So then, Keith, can I ask you a question? I guess I just did. But what I mean is, so I agree with everything that you said, and I think the market is absolutely complacent. You were the first person I've spoken to who was on that. But the problem is, you've basically outlined a situation where the central banks are basically never going to raise rates. So how can an investor be bearish in an environment where there's no squeeze from monetary policy? That's the trouble I'm having right now in formulating my view.
Right, because every slowdown is met with control plus P.
Yeah. So where does the squeeze come from? And it comes from the emerging market world. So it won't come from sovereign debt markets. So it'll come from credit spreads, for example. So everyone knows, you can get a mortgage rate. What's a 5-year term? I have no idea.
Today, 2.4.
Okay. So let's just say, for example, some bad things happen around the world and it gets reflected in the yield curve. So credit spreads move up and people say, what the heck does that mean? What it means is that 5-year term goes from 2.4 to 4.8.
Okay, but wouldn't the Central Bank of Canada just step in and purchase more bonds to keep that number down? I guess that's my point.
Well, I mean, they're reactive to that. So this is where the commercial banks. Remember, the commercial banks and loan growth, especially in the U.S., the growth is slowing considerably. So you're not getting money creation in the U.S. So if you're RBC and TD, any of these guys, all of a sudden you see risk is increasing, you increase your lending standards. Make sure more deposits are required to get the loan, and you jack up rates a little bit because bankers don't like to lose money, and that's what they're fearful of. And central banks are reactive towards it.
I mean, but to be fair, not to nitpick, but credit card growth is growing in America, and I think that's an important something to throw out there.
Isn't there a very realistic plausibility in that case, Keith, where you have that mortgage rate goes to 4.8 or whatever? But the short rate, the BOC's overnight rate, which is currently 0.25% for those paying attention, just doesn't move. So you have spreads blow out. So your 5-year fixed mortgage goes to, let's say, 4.8, but your overnight rate stays basically at 0, i.e. your variable rate mortgage, if you're on that, doesn't change.
Yeah, and like you think about Rich, central bank of Canada buying mortgages, for example. Crazy. They did that because back in February and March of 2020, the banks knocked on their door and said, "Hey, we need you guys to buy this stuff because if you don't, we're going to go under." That's what the threat is always out there. And they say, "Holy smokes! If Canadian bank, if they get in trouble, all the banks will be in trouble. Then everyone's in trouble." And then that afternoon, Newfoundland called them and said, "We have a bond coming up next week, and we know we cannot roll it over." They just had bad luck. They were the first Canadian province that had debt coming due during this crisis. So again, it's the central bank being reactive. They didn't decide out of the blue, let's buy mortgage-backed securities. Again, like these central banks, they speak with their top commercial banks every single day. What are you seeing? What are you feeling? Are you ready new business? Or what are your loan losses like? Your provisioning and charge-offs, and you go down to the whole
Keith,
list.
Keith,
it's
everything,
tough though, guys.
Keith, everything that you've laid out, I agree with 100%. Straight. Your premise, in my view, is exactly how I feel the premise should be. My issue when I'm trying to figure out my view, and for the first time in a long, long time, I feel like I'm on unstable ground with respect to being bullish or bearish. And my clients need to be invested. And so everything that you've laid out makes me feel like you still want to own equities over bonds. And I just want to make sure that am I interpreting what you're saying right or wrong? Or
yeah, no, you're absolutely right. So
with sorry to interrupt you, but with a clear understanding that you might have shitty returns in that equity, but they will be less shitty than owning bonds, if that makes sense. Sorry to interrupt you, but
Oh, yeah, that's fine. I mean, so for us, we wouldn't. Our client portfolios are invested across maybe 5 to 6 different. We call them asset classes. So one of the biggest ones would be the equity markets, for example. We feel that you're able to structure your portfolio today across a whole mixture of different kinds of markets, so that we know, for example, just say we get another huge risk off event, we know our equities are going to go down pretty hard that we hold, because equities go down in that scenario. However, the other allocations we have, and the sense they will make money during that kind of a market. So I think for investors these days, if you are proactive, you know what central banks will do, hey, a slowdown is coming. There are still ways to stay invested, but to reduce the probability of that large drawdown. Now, of course, by doing that, it means you're not going to get a 25, 30% return, right? But really, like, who wants to be up 30% one year, down 15 the next year, up 5?
I don't. I'd have a heart attack.
Yeah. It's tough. So again, I know we're sort of floating around a little bit here, but
no, I think that was for me.
I have
to be honest with you, that was genuinely, honestly, and no bullshit. That was very important for me to hear from you, because that's when I say to you, I'm having trouble on trying to understand for the first time in 20 months, am I bullish or am I bearish? I don't actually know. And to hear you say that for me was actually very useful.
Yeah, I think there's some great opportunities to make money here coming up, and because if we get the slightest downtick in equity markets right now, like, it could turn into a floodgate, and who is not fully invested in equities? So we got plenty of opportunity to go in, and so there's lots of ways to make money, and plus as well, we're not going to go down the financial product road here, but there's a lot of new innovation in different strategies that will help your portfolio do better or not as bad. If we do get this volatility coming up,
long. You just go long volatility.
Yeah, like volatility and convexity, if people know what that is. So it's really, again, if you just stay pragmatic about it, then I think it's a great.
And you do this you do this in your portfolio, or for your clients?
Yeah, we do. Yeah.
I'm a client. Full disclosure.
Well, I've seen the minimums, by the way, so that's good for you.
Steve is the client that calls every day, and
I can't afford Keith.
Keith, I have a question from your comment earlier about, for example, I'm trying to spin this back for Canada land here. If you had that 5-year mortgage rate come up to that 4.8% because spreads blow out, and the Bank of Canada, for example, temporarily loses control, do you have an opinion? I mean, it's so hard to say, obviously, but how long do you see that lasting? Because my always, similar to what Rich was kind of saying, my always hunch is these guys will do whatever it takes, including throwing the kitchen sink, to try to suppress, interest rates or yields, or credit spreads, essentially. How long do you feel that distorts, right? Because I'm just thinking about it from a market perspective, obviously housing. So if those 5-year mortgage goes to 4.8%, I mean, if it's only there for, 3, 4, 5 months, probably not the end of the world. It would certainly probably bring housing prices down for a little bit. Do you see those getting back under control, and how would they react?
So in that environment, again, I think that's being driven by factors outside of Canada. So again, it's not, because of something inside the country. The next remember, we're in a world with zero negative rates. Governments, they borrow too much. They're talking about creating their own central bank digital currencies and all this fun stuff. The next event that these guys want to do will be to cancel debt. That's what they want to do. They're saying, hey, if the Bank of Canada is holding federal government bonds, just cancel it. Like, why do we need to pay? Because it just goes, in and out. So I think that's the road we're going, but Canada will not be the first up to do that. So other countries would do it first, and then, Canada will follow in line. As how that would have
1, 2, 3, probably Japan 1, Europe 2, Fed 3.
Yeah, I think Japan is there's
too many
over there.
There's too many good lawyers in the U.S. The U.S. will never do it. There's way too many lawyers in the U.S. to let that happen. I don't see it happening in the U.S.
So it's pretty easy in Japan, though. So what they would do, the Bank of Japan, I mean, they already own like nth percent of
60%, isn't it?
They own more than that. They own a ton of the market. But if you think about it, like they on Friday afternoon, they make an announcement. Hey, banks are closed on Monday for this holiday. And the Bank of the Bank of Japan, they bought all outstanding government of Japanese bonds. So they have them all on their books. And they can't just cancel them because they own all of these bonds, that means no pension funds hold it anymore, right? So then when they cancel it, it's not a loss for anyone. It's just an accounting ledger entry, for these guys. But the only way to get to the point where you can not pay back the debt, you have to have the whole market to do it. Because remember, so anyone I like picking on RBC because I used to work there, but if you're holding like the RBC balance fund, you probably have 20 to 30% government of Canada debt in that fund. If that went to zero, it's game over. So that has to be acquired first and so forth. But, back to your question, though, Steve, I think if we go from 2.4 to 4.8 in the 5-year mortgage very, very quickly, the world we're living in at 4.8 is going to look very different than the world that we have today. And at that point in time, people are going to look back and say, yeah, of course we knew this was going to happen. We watched the Loonie Hour, right? So we know it's going down.
The modern day debt jubilee.
Yeah, something is going to make things look different than where we are, and that's not a bad thing. It's, again, if you're prepared for it, you just keep going on.
I wonder if, I don't know how much additional time we got here, but Keith,
I have 3 minutes.
I'll save this one for another time, but I was going to.
I'm a very busy.
Boomers are always on a schedule.
He's got nap time coming up.
Is there a mailbag question, Steve? Is there a question from the mailbag?
I've scrapped the mailbag.
Really? I have a good story. Have a good story for everyone that we should go into. So good Canadian stuff here. So everyone saw the Canadian national soccer team beat Mexico.
Oh yeah, that was amazing.
Yeah, it was really cool. And so I don't know if anyone follows World Cup soccer for Canadians. Like, we haven't been very good for a long time. So the last time we qualified for the World Cup was in 1986 for Mexico.
How old were you, Keith?
I would have been 16 back then. So, but I was an exceptional soccer player, so I was really following it. And so the last qualifying game that we had to get into the tournament was against Honduras, and it was this time of year. And because Canada was hosting it, they looked around the country and said, "Man, who has the crappiest weather? Who can we make these lads from Honduras come up and like just freeze themselves?" So they had the game in St. John's, Newfoundland. And that's where I was living, of course. So, the pitch we had there, maybe it's said 1,000 people. We had 5,000 people crammed in there and, yelling and screaming. And, the poor Hondurans, they show up and, I think one of them said it's cold outside, but at least it's windy. It was pretty bad. So anyway, we won the game. So, a little, congratulations to the Canadian soccer team, that won this week. And the other side story of that, what makes Canadian geography a bit different for some people. Honduras that year, they had maybe 100 fans that were going to travel with the team to St. John's, to watch the game and support them. Their travel agent sent them to St. John, New Brunswick instead of Newfoundland. So these guys had to watch the game somewhere else as well. Anyway, that's some Canadiana for us all.
I love it. That's a good way to wrap it up. Episode 6. We'll be back next week. I have a conspiracy theory I'd like to share for next week.
And I'll be in America next week, so I'll let you know how it is down there.
Land of the free.
Where are you going to, Rich? We're in America.
I'm going to Bedford, Connecticut, just outside Rhode Island. So I'm flying into Boston. I'm gonna egg some Boston Bruins fans, and then I'll take the train up to Rhode Island. And yeah, there you go.
What are you doing there?
my girlfriend's family's out there, so I'm going to go spend some time with the fam. I'm really excited. I love America and I love American Thanksgiving. There's football on TV, turkey, and maybe I'll get into a gunfight. Who knows what will happen?
Actually, we're invited to Connecticut next week as well, and but we're not going to be there.
We can take your private jet. We can take our private jet.
Yeah, well, we should get like a Loonie Hour bus. We'll go up to Connecticut. Road trip.
Good stuff. Okay, guys.
Oh man. All right, guys. We'll wrap this one up here.